This is the day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Thank you for coming on this beautiful spring day. I think spring is finally here for good. I'm Ed Larman, Director of Geneva Campus Ministry here at the University of Iowa. And there's more information about us in the back if you'd like to find out more about us. And we're welcoming you to the Geneva Forum today. At the Geneva Forum, we ask faculty and students to share what do they find delights them in their field of study? What is their passion for their field? In other words, to share with us what they're finding of the good, the true, and the beautiful. At Geneva, we believe that God is the source of the good, the true, and the beautiful, and we want to explore all the different areas where that is being discovered and shared here at the university. If you'd like to be on our email list for forums, or for other events, and are not already on our list, I have a sign-up list, so I will pass that around. If you're already getting the emails, then you're set. I want to offer a special thanks to Channel 4 for taping this event, and welcome to our television audience also. Usually we have UI faculty and students speak, but we have a special treat today. Dr. Calvin DeWitt and his wife Ruth are with us. Cal is a scientist, an author, an activist, a beloved teacher, a storyteller. He has long taught at the University of Wisconsin in Madison in the Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies. He has a wide range of interests, but a special focus on wetlands is his specialty. He's been involved in environmental issues all the way from the marsh in his backyard to state government and federal government and the United Nations. He's won awards from the UN, from the National Wildlife Federation, from many different organizations for his environmental work. I would consider Cal the father of evangelical Christian environmentalism. He's written several books, lots of articles. One small book that gives an introduction to his thought is Earthwise, a guide to hopeful creation care. And would certainly recommend that you pick that up. Cal is co-founder of the Evangelical Environmental Network, founder of the Ensemble Institute, a Christian Environmental Stewardship Institute in Michigan, president of the Academy of Evangelical Scientists and Ethicists. He's traveled from his backyard to all around the world for his environmental work. I guess if I had to sum up Cal in one word, which would be difficult, I would say he's a lover. He's a lover of God, of creation, and of his fellow human beings. So we're honored to have Dr. Calvin DeWitt today.
Thank you very much, Ed, and thank you, good people here, and thank you for listening, people on the television network. It's been a pleasure to come back here with Ruth. We have been here before, and we come by U.S. Highway 151, which, of course, all of us had concerns about because it would cut through all of this beautiful farmland, but the thing it's done for us is to expose the geological history of the land through all these remarkable road cuts, and it was just remarkable for us to review all that substructure of Wisconsin and Iowa as we're coming out. So that was a very wonderful thing. My work has been, as Ed has said, spanning the field of science and Christianity. And I have been committed to reading two books, as they say in my particular field of interest. I read the book of nature and read the book of Scripture, both of them coherently and coherently between the two. This is really the focus of my life and my work, is reading the creation and reading how it all works. I'm currently working on regulatory systems for global climate, and I think this morning just made a breakthrough while Ruth was doing the Sudoku, and I was waiting to have coffee. I think it's a milestone for the year, sitting on the edge of my bed, writing notes. But I'll tell you that next year as it maybe gets published. If it never gets published, then of course it's really no good. So we'll try that out later. My topic is an interesting one. Ed and I interacted on developing this topic. It is the license to spoil or mandate to keep. The origin of this title comes from two different views that have been taken about the Scripture, about the Bible, and one that was amplified very dramatically by Lynn White, a medieval historian, who in 1967 wrote a paper in Science. It's the most reprinted article in Science magazine ever written. It's called The Ecologic Roots of Our Historical Crisis. It's the historical roots of our ecologic crisis. And what Lynn White does is to lay the blame for environmental degradation on one verse in the Bible, namely Genesis 1, verse 28. That verse gives dominion over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air to human beings. And the dominion word there is followed by a radah word, which means to rule. And by itself, this is a pretty harsh verse. The problem with Lynn White's analysis is pointed out very clearly by Wendell Berry, the great poet and essayist, Kentucky farmer, who says the first principle of literary criticism is you must read the whole book. And there are a lot of books, if you pick one sentence out of it and make too much out of it, you might miss the message of the book. For example, as I was working many, many years ago on hunger issues worldwide, I sometimes would give a talk and people would have amongst them somebody who would say, "The poor you always have with you." They would be quoting Scripture, and of course that's probably true, but that wasn't the point of the Scripture. There is a real preferential treatment of the poor in the Scriptures rather than a denial of serving them. So when Lynn White wrote this article, it created a tremendous stir. He in fact presented this as a paper to the AAAS meetings that were being held shortly before this publication. And so what happened was it became part of the syllabus of many, many university classes across the whole U.S. It still is part of the readings. The main thesis is Christianity is the cause of the environmental crisis. He does offer an alternative, and he holds up St. Francis as the patron saint whom we should follow. So he's really not abandoning Christianity completely, although that would probably meet your mind as the first thought. But he's saying we should be more like St. Francis, who also had a Christian worldview. The important thing for us then is to see the stimulus for this tremendous discussion. There's a lot written on it, probably more a response to this article than any other in Science and its history. This is a picture of the first few paragraphs, the historical roots of our ecologic crisis. The response to this included a remarkable book by Douglas John Hall. Douglas John Hall, a professor at McGill University, a theologian in a secular university, a very accomplished person, wrote a book entitled Imaging God, Dominion as Stewardship. This is the dominion as stewardship, and I've written it out here so you can see it more clearly. What he did was to do an analysis of the entire Bible, Old Testament and New Testament, and he not only dealt with this one verse, Genesis 1:28, but he dealt with the entire Scripture. And what he concluded from this as a biblical scholar and as a theologian is that the idea, the concept of dominion, as it's presented in Genesis 1:28, taken into the context of the rest of Scripture, really translates into stewardship. Now, what is stewardship? Stewardship is really taking charge over things particularly that we have abused. In other words, if there is a negative response of creation to something we do, we have responsibility for restoration of that so that the creation continues to work well and so that God as creator is continued to be honored. This is Douglas John Hall's point in this book. So of the thousands of responses, I picked this one out because what he's saying is that we image God as John Stott calls us homo divinus. We image God, and in imaging God, we don't destroy, but we create, we restore, we heal, and sustain. Wendell Berry is the person I mentioned right off, and he is a great farmer, a tremendous essayist and a poet, and I think many of us have read his works. And Wendell has probably contributed the most and the best theology to this whole topic of environmental stewardship. For many years I read Wendell, and many of us did. We had no idea he had any knowledge of the Bible. And we read The Unsettling of America and all sorts of essays, poems, Jabber Crow, and a novel. And we thought it was just harmonizing so well with the way nature works. And he was also very critical of unjust structures in the society and about greed and arrogance. And so everybody resonated with Wendell, especially people in the universities. And it was only when he gave a lecture to a theological seminary, when he stood up in front of his audience there and he said, "I've never felt comfortable on the audience side of the pulpit, but certainly never comfortable on the preacher's side, and here I stand on the preacher's side telling you what I think." And what he does in this is he brings forth biblical principles for stewardship that have informed his writing throughout his entire career. The most important thing, I think, what he tells us is that we are, in fact, commissioned as stewards of the earth. And so we come to this phrase, mandate to keep. Where does this come from, this keep word? It comes from Genesis 2, verse 15. We're now one chapter later from Genesis 1:28. Genesis 2:15 is a mandate that's given to the gardener, and the gardener is expected to avad the garden and shamar the garden. These are Hebrew words. I'm going to get back to the avad word in just a moment, but for now, look at the shamar word. The shamar word in Hebrew is the same word used in the blessing of Aaron in Numbers 6:24. The Lord bless you and shamar you. It is a word that is translated to keep. And what Adam of Adamah, the earthling of the earth, is asked to keep is the garden. And so it's from this that we get the word earth-keeping. Earth-keeping was one of the theme words of the environmental movement some 20 years ago, and was the title of a book I contributed to called Earthkeeping, Christian Stewardship of Creation. So the mandate to keep immediately follows this dominion passage, and taken together, of course, it means we may take charge, but we may take charge only to heal, to restore, and to keep. So we come back to Wendell and then move to one of his most prominent statements, and that is the care of the earth is our most ancient, most worthy, and most pleasing responsibility. And I paraphrased it slightly. Now in 1967, there was another major publication. It's widely cited, but almost never read. It's called Traces on the Rhodian Shore. It's written by Clarence Glacken, who was a professor at the University of California in Berkeley. It's remarkable that in 1967, I'll give you a parenthesis, my doctoral dissertation was published on the behavioral thermoregulation of the desert iguana. It's famous in its own really tiny world of about 80 readers. But in that same year, Lynn White's article came out, and Clarence Glacken. Clarence Glacken was a geographer at the University of California, Berkeley. He had worked for years to produce finally this magisterial volume. It's actually called that by his reviewers. The subtitle really tells the story, Nature and Culture in Western Thought from Ancient Times to the End of the 18th Century. It was published in 1967 by the University of California Press. I read this book 3 times on airplanes with my marker. One thing that's nice about airplanes, long flights especially, is that you've got lots of time, and if it's cloudy, the landscape no longer is visible. If it's clear, I always look at the landscape. But there have been enough cloudy flights that I went through this book 3 times, and what I found to be awfully exciting was, well, there's one statement by Clarence Glacken that says, sometimes you get so deeply into a subject, you have a hard time explaining its essence. Well, it took me the 3rd reading to finally find these statements, and here's one of them. The outstanding characteristic of the medieval period as a whole was its preoccupation with creation, by which he means creation as it's described in the scriptures, or creation as we know it to be as the biosphere. This long discussion of creation and its meaning in the formative period of Western civilization intensified interest in unity and harmony in nature. This was a discovery. I had never seen it cited before. In fact, I was so excited when it was a few years ago, I put up this statement on the web and I found someone who cited it. And I went back and it was me. It was I. I've done that so often in my work lately is these discoveries I get confirmed by citing myself. But this is really what he said. And here is another, is a direct quote, Christianity and the ideas that lay behind it is a religion and a philosophy of creation. It is preoccupied with the Creator, with the things He created, and their relationships to Him and among themselves. This is really kind of a blockbuster statement. It really is. It reminds me of one sentence that I wrote in my doctoral dissertation, opsit. And that that statement was so important that Warren Wagner on my committee said, "That's so important, you should say it 3 times because it's buried in the text." And I tried to do that, but it's very difficult to be redundant without looking like you're redundant. And this is the only time that Glacken writes this in, 670 pages, and it takes 3 airplane flights to find it because you can't speed read and find this particular text. So Christianity and the ideas that lay behind it is a religion and a philosophy of creation, preoccupied with the Creator, with the things He created, and their relationships to Him and among themselves. What he does is, in his treatment of nature and culture in Western thought, from ancient times to the end of the 18th century, he comes to the end of the 18th century in which he describes how this stewardship tradition that is part of Christianity from its origins at the time of Christ, right on through to that point, how it comes into the industrial revelation and it begins to falter. And toward the end of his analysis, he says, this tradition begins to wither. And the reason is that human beings get weak-kneed about the attempts they have been made to steward the earth when they see all this pollution, the industrialization, and the stewardship tradition falters and finally is set aside by industrialization. So what's happening today in the last few decades, especially in the last 2 decades and in the present, is a lot of us, including myself, are working to make that stewardship tradition not only known, but also to rediscover these roots. Not because those roots would be acceptable to all peoples, but because they would affect Christianity, Jews and Judaism as well, in a bolstering way, in an uplifting way to help them restore a tradition that has faltered and has been lost. So the big project now is called creation care, or caring for creation, or environmental stewardship. And the word stewardship has emerged only in the last 3 decades related to the environment. It used to be used only in churches for getting bigger collections for your budget. That was stewardship of time, talent, and treasure, and they focused on treasure. But now it's stewardship of God's creation, and we called it environmental stewardship for a while, and so many Christian people said, "Oh, but I'm not an environmentalist." So we came up with the idea of creation care. It's the same thing as environmental stewardship. So we're going to look at some of the biblical material here. There will be 3 principles capped off by a 4th concluding one. And I thought you would be curious to see that we do have published by a major publisher a book called The Green Bible. I have an essay in the front of this, which is, I think it's just before Bishop Tudo's essay. And I have fun with this because every once in a while someone will say, "Well, where have you written?" And I said, "Well, I've written in the Bible." And they'll say, "Man, you don't look that old." But the 2 chapters out of Earthkeeping I've pulled together into a single essay, and that's in here as well. But this is an interesting edition of the Bible. It's the NRSV, and it has green letters for all of the environmentally related texts. What do we find here? And I'm going to point out 3 principles which permeate the Scriptures and are very fundamental, very basic to understanding what Clarence Glacken is telling us about the strength and witness and force of the Christian worldview on caring for the earth. And those are earth-keeping, which I've just mentioned from Genesis 2:15, fruitfulness, and Sabbath. So we're going to say those together so that I'm a teacher as well as a scientist, so I find out that if I have people say things, they'll remember them longer. So we're going to do that. Say earth-keeping, fruitfulness, and Sabbath. Here we go. Earth-keeping, fruitfulness, and Sabbath. So earth-keeping comes to this word I mentioned right at the start, and that's the word shamar. The word shamar means in Hebrew to keep, but there are two words in Hebrew for keeping. The other word is natsar, which is the word that you would use for keeping pickles in a jar. It's interesting as you read through the Torah, the 5 books of the law, the first 5 books of the Bible, what you'll see is that we have to natsar the law, which means to keep it like pickles in a jar, and we have to shamar the law, which means we have to keep it dynamically by doing them. And so there's a difference here, and when Adam is asked to shamar the garden, it's the shamar word. And shamar means to keep with dynamic integrity. It means to keep, if we are reading the blessing of Aaron, it means to keep us physiologically, psychologically, psychiatrically. This is a psychiatrist. And biologically, it is to sustain us with all of our integrity, dynamically, and to repair ourselves as we get diseased, unhealthy. It's a shamar, which is a beautiful dynamic keeping. It is the same shamar that God gives to creation. And we're supposed to image that by doing the same keeping for creation. This is the richness of the word earth keeping. As the Lord keeps and sustains us, so we must keep and sustain our Lord's creation. Shamar. So earth keeping, fruitfulness, and Sabbath. Fruitfulness, there are a number of places where we can look for this. The most exciting one for me is the story of Noah and the Ark, which is the world's first Endangered Species Act. What is interesting here is that when the entire world is threatened with extinction of species, Noah is given the commission to take enough of life so that the lineages would be maintained after the flood. And what it points out is the importance of maintaining the fruitfulness, not necessarily preserving the life of every creature, but maintaining the lineages. One of my Jewish colleagues called me at one point when she was writing her book on the same theme. She was saying, "Cal, could you tell me if in the Christian perspective there's anything that talks about preserving individual animals rather than just lineages? Because I'm worried about this with my readers. If I say it's just the lineages." And I said, well, you know, Jesus takes on the Sabbath, helps an ox out of the ditch, and but you're going to start to stretch it pretty much. I think it's lineages primarily, because that's the fruitfulness. So we may take of the fruit of creation, but not destroy its fruitfulness. And that's why the Endangered Species Act is so vital, because it's a way to maintain a sure fruitfulness of creation. I should also point out Ezekiel 3:18, "Is it not enough for you to feed on the green pasture? Must you also trample the rest with your feet? Is it not enough for you to drink the pure water? Must you muddy the rest with your feet?" And there are a lot of other teachings of fruitfulness. So we have earth-keeping, fruitfulness, and then Sabbath. Sabbath, of course, relates to rest for us. It's good for our mental health. It's good for the restoration of the land that we might otherwise impact. And it's good for restoring our own selves. But rest for people is joined with rest for the land. In Exodus 23, it says, when you enter the land that I will show you, the land will keep a Sabbath rest. And some of us are involved in restoration ecology and in reestablishing areas that have been abused. We're applying there this principle of the Sabbath. Leviticus 25 and 26 says, if you fail to keep these ordinances, the land will take its own Sabbaths, the Sabbaths it had not when you dwelt upon it. In other words, if you abuse the land, it no longer will support you. And when you move off, it'll finally get the Sabbath rest it deserved. There are a lot of lands like that in the world. So, 3 principles: earthkeeping, fruitfulness, and Sabbath. We're going to say them again. Earthkeeping, fruitfulness, Sabbath. And then the overarching principle. When I had given a talk at the University of New Hampshire on these topics of stewardship, a woman came up to me after the talk and asked if I could give a presentation for the Long Island Garden Conservancy, of which she was the chair. And I said I would. I had 6 months to prepare, didn't do anything for 3 of those. And then 3 months before, I start thinking, now what am I going to say? And so I went to my computer Bible and I put up the word garden. And of course I came right away to the Garden of Eden. And I came to Genesis 2:15, the one I mentioned for Shamar. And that's when I discovered this word avad. Adam is asked to avad the garden. I then clicked my cursor onto avad, and all over the Bible came up English words that used avad that were translations of it. And here's one, for example. Choose ye this day whom you shall avad. As for me and my house, we will avad Jehovah. What does that mean? Serve. And when I saw that, I mean, once in a while Ruth sees me when I'm in this mode, but I jumped off my chair and I didn't say hallelujah, but I felt like hallelujah. I felt like singing, but I wasn't sure. So I called a friend who was the librarian at Calvin Theological Seminary, Conrad Bolt, and I said, Conrad, this is an emergency. Find a Bible where this is translated to serve. And 3 hours later, he called back and said, Cal, I found it. It's in Young's literal translation. I think the date was 1890, and it literally translated the avad word to serve. Adam is asked to serve the garden. Some of you know that when Teddy Roosevelt was riding on horseback next to Clifford Pinchot, when they were thinking of having a governor's conference on conservation, which they didn't have a word for, Teddy said to Gifford Pinchot, what are we going to call this conference? And Pinchot said, why don't we call it conservation? That's the first that we know the word was used. We have no idea whether Teddy or Pinchot were thinking in terms of Genesis 2:15, but they well may have, given Teddy's background in the Reformed Church, in the Dutch Reformed Church, which confesses this service. But despite what happened, what we have is, with avad, the mandate to serve. And what's interesting is if you look at the garden, our first impression probably is that it serves us with food, with pleasantness, beauty, with nice microclimates, maybe with herbs and medicines. But if you do your gardening, you'll realize that it's a con-service. It doesn't just serve us, we serve it back. We pull the weeds, we plant the seeds, and so there is a reciprocal service. And I think that's what's coming through in the text. The text is telling us what we don't really think of, our service to it. And it knows that we know that, that it's a reciprocal service. So it serves us, we serve it, it's a conservation. So 3 principles, I think there are, fruitfulness, earthkeeping, fruitfulness, and what were these again? And then finally, conservice, or conservice. So that is so conservancy. So here I am at the Long Island Garden Conservancy. James Watson introduced the program for the day, the discoverer of DNA. It was pretty awesome. And then I was able to tell them of my discovery of what their conservancy was about and how it related to the garden. It was so beautiful. And this, of course, is another word for stewardship. Stewardship also is doing things, responding to those things in a way that restores what went wrong and continues to do things that are going right. Living in harmony with the biosphere, giving back to the biosphere for what it gives you. Conservice. I've worked on this not only at the theological and scientific level, but at one point worked very strongly with a colleague of mine, Sir John Houghton, in the UK, to create a forum between Christian leaders and climate scientists from around the world. We met at Oxford, and this is a report in the magazine Nature, which is the principal scientific publication in the UK. It was a special report for the magazine, that issue, Church Joins Crusade Over Climate Change. This is the group that met, and we came up with what's called the Oxford Declaration on Global Warming in 2002. And this is Sir John. He chaired the scientific working group for the first 3 reports of the IPCC, and he's the person who received the Nobel Prize in behalf of the rest of the IPCC. He presented the scientific side, I presented the theological side, and then we coordinated across theologians and scientists. It was a really major milestone. Here is Sir John and me and Rich Cizik, who was with the National Association of Evangelicals, and he made the statement within the NAE that warming, global warming and global climate change was a Christian issue. We later got together a bunch of scientists and evangelicals to form what's called the Science and Evangelical Initiative. We had a press conference in Washington, D.C., and we issued an urgent call to action. This was now 6 years ago. We believe that the protection of life on Earth is a profound moral imperative, and so forth. It requires a new moral awakening, and for many of us, this is a religious obligation rooted in our sense of gratitude for creation and reverence for the Creator. And one of these signers of this was E.O. Wilson. Some of you know E.O. Wilson. He sometimes is referred to as the living Darwin of today. He's an evolutionary biologist. He does not believe in the Christian message, although he is born and raised as a Southern Baptist, and he still He tells me he still loves to listen to Christian television because he likes the theatrics. But he wrote this book, The Creation. It's a letter to a Southern Baptist pastor, and he and I have been working to reintroduce the words "the creation" into the scientific community as well as in the religious community. A meeting of science and religion. Science and religion, science and Christianity have a shared reverence for life on earth. They share a deep reverence and a profound concern and sense of urgency about what human activity is doing to it. So one of the things I've done, as you know from some of you had this book, this is the third edition, a guide to hopeful creation care called Earthwise. And it's used in churches, many places. How many of you have used it in your church? Just raise your hand high so that, you know, there are 3 Lutherans here. Because people wrote me from Iowa City saying, there's so many signing up for this class, we need more, and we only have about a week or 10 days, and I knew you were here. It's really great to have you here. The religious composition in the U.S. is really interesting. Evangelical 26%, Catholic 23%, mainline Protestant 18%, historically black Christian churches 7%, Orthodox 0.6%. 75% of Americans are in one of these religious groups. This is one of the reasons this topic is so important, not only for people who profess Christian and Jewish faith, but those who don't, because if we can somehow reach everyone of faith and help them restore this long-standing stewardship tradition, which has been part of their belief system now for nearly 2,000 years, it could mark a very major turning for our work as stewards of creation. So we have formed the National Religious Partnership for the Environment amongst Jewish, the U.S. Catholic Conference, National Councils of Churches, and Evangelical Environmental Network. That's ongoing. And of course, there's been Interfaith Power and Light. Here's a banner for Iowa, and these are in almost every state now. So this is another response. The NAE, the National Association of Evangelicals, has a paper now that's written by one of my PhD students, Dorothy Borse, called Loving the Least of These, Addressing a Changing Environment. So this is just recently out. There's a tremendous movement forward. And this is the work which I was chairing at the Christian Reformed Church in North America on creation stewardship. And it's really, really nice that we have now a tremendously big and informative document, which you can get if you Google CRCNA, it's Christian Reformed Church North America, and if you Google CRCNA and Creation Care, you'll be able to get an Adobe copy of this report. It's very extensive, well over 100 pages long, and getting really good reviews. We have, as authors here, a climatologist, geologists, soil scientists, a group of about 12 of us that prepared this report under mandate from the Christian Reformed Church in North America. So with this, I'm going to conclude saying that we have a long-standing tradition in Christianity, that Lynn White did us a great service by pricking us hard with this statement that we're the cause of an environmental crisis. It has brought us to realize that we're part of a tradition that has been lost very largely, and now is seeing some resurgence, is being restored, and offers hope that we can pull together our ourselves, our society, on an ethical and scientific basis to care for the earth, which is so precious and so sustaining of all life, including our own. Thank you.
Sometimes if we followed all the health directives for ourselves, we would basically spend all day and have no time for work or anything. What kind of guidelines could we look to in terms of responsible but practical implementation of creation care? I sense that there's a diversity of everything from don't pick a weed to plow everything under for ethanol, all with this sense of confidence that each of them are correct. So what would be some place for guidelines? There's no pope, so to speak, for that. Do you think that the CRCNA is the place, or how do we get going without being overwhelmed?
Yeah, how do we get going without being overwhelmed? And one of the things that I would recommend is we certainly can do things individually. There's nothing wrong with us doing things individually. One would be, for example, gardening and doing things that increase your awe, appreciation, respect for creation. But I think the key thing is for us to work in community. And this is where, if you would get a copy of my Earthwise book, what you'll find, I think it's chapter 5, it is an exercise for you to use in community to discover what your common values are and to work together on them. It is, I don't know if the Lutheran Church represented here has done that yet, but I know you came to that chapter, and that was a way to generate the ideas within your community of what you can act on. Now, I can tell you some things that have happened from this. One thing that's happened at the denominational level is there have been many statements made that are official statements of position by the denomination. The Christian Reformed Church has done that. Many of the Presbyterian denominations have done that. The Lutheran ELCA has a tremendously good statement. The Anglican Communion has a tremendously good statement. So at the denominational level, and that has been stimulated in part from the Earthwise chapter, but at the local level, it has generated activities at a particular church or within a particular parish. That has included the development of a community garden or a system of community gardens. It's resulted in the transformation of many sanctuaries into energy efficiency models. There have been a number of churches that have participated in the Energy Star program, which is part of the U.S. Department of Energy program, and they've saved lots of money, but they've also become a greater witness for creation care. There are some churches that have transformed their external landscapes, so when someone arrives, they think something different is happening here. There'll be some prairie plants. There won't be all monoculture. The parking lot will have a bicycle stand closest to the entrance rather than one more parking place, inviting people to bicycle, and if there's no bicycles there, they keep it there because there is a witness. They change the way they serve their coffee in the morning. So there's a continual awareness. I remember one church I walked into at one point had been doing these remodeling. In fact, what they had done, it was an air-conditioned cathedral. And what they had done is installed 3 great big containers about the size of this room beneath the pulpit at tremendous expense. And during the week at night, they froze a liquid by refrigeration using excess electricity being generated by the power plant. of the city, which is Madison Gas and Electric. And then on Sunday, they ran this fluid up to run their air conditioning system. It was amazing. They used excess energy production of the power plant to air condition their church for just 3 hours. And but I think one of the most amazing things that happened to me when I was walking in their front entrance is all of a sudden it goes really high above you, and you look above, and painted all across the ceiling is a blue sky with puffy clouds. There are other churches that have removed a stained glass window right in front of a tremendous natural scene so that you can actually see out into the world. Stained glass windows are wonderful. In this case, they donated it to a museum. It was so wonderful. And they get to see part of God's creation. Another church I know has their front doors all carved with Noah's Ark's animals. Really beautiful. It's a Lutheran church, Lakeside Lutheran in Madison, Wisconsin. Another church with solar panels. So what we have to do is we have to come up with these ideas ourselves. And that's what my chapter 5 deals with. So here's one of my nurse students. She's a nurse in a public hospital, and what she discovered was that her patients were being deprived of nature study while they were patients. And what she did, and now this is occurring all over the city of Madison, she established a program of rooftop gardens, beautiful gardens, and in her own hospital she has a major roof that has patients' windows looking out on it, and it's all in the summer, all in flowers, and a beautiful, beautiful thing. How did she come up with this? Well, she put herself in the position of the patient who had, maybe at home, had a bird feeder, had a nice yard, or at least could take a walk, and in a hospital bed, she thought they no longer can do that. So she met with architects, she's given seminars, and she's a nurse. Where can you stop? What it has to do is, it has to do with love. A love of neighbor, love of creation, love of the Creator, love of the beauty of the world. And it does, of course, require that you make the distinction between making money and making life. Making a good life versus making a good money. There is no such thing as good money, but there is such a thing as a good life, and we should make a good life. That really is a key, is to work on that particular task with enthusiasm and resolve and joy.
There's some evidence, by the way, that looking at nature scenes in a hospital unit
yes.
cuts down on pain medicine and days in hospital.
Say that again.
There's some evidence that being able to look out a window on a natural scene cuts down on use of pain medicine and days in hospital.
Okay. My question kind of, you mentioned money. My question goes about money and consumption. What are some of your comments about, as a society we consume this huge amount of material that often ends up as waste?
Yeah. I think the first thing we have to do is to redefine ourselves back to what we used to call ourselves. We all become accustomed to calling ourselves consumers. And whenever I hear that word, I think of a big deep sea fish. There are these fish which are very tiny bodied, and they have a great big mouth and a tremendous stomach. Whenever anyone calls me a consumer, I think of myself that way, and I think, horrors, I'm not a consumer. At best, I'm a customer. I might be a client, but never a consumer. And who is a producer? Oftentimes the producers are destroyers. They may destroy the soil in order to give us a flavorless vegetable. And we're not taxpayers. We're citizens. Isn't it frustrating to be called a taxpayer? Because as soon as you're called a taxpayer, what you're supposed to do is say, I'm against that, but really we are providers for the hospital, for the roads, for the government that is maintaining a civil society. We're not taxpayers. And another new word that's come up just recently is spending bill. Spending bill. Is that what you do when you set your home budget for the next year, is to develop a spending plan? It's not. It's a budget. So we've allowed all these words, there are many of them, to creep in on us, and we're beginning to think of ourselves as taxpayers, abused, of course, by those who govern, which don't govern at all, and it's just a horrible shift in our vocabulary. So one thing we could do is to reclaim the vocabulary that actually treats us as human beings. Like, what has human resources got to do with employment? Every one of our departments now, even in this university, I'm sure, is called the Department of Human Resources. Are we resources? No, it used to be a personnel department. It's probably now a division of human resources. And when you can't fire people, what happens? They bring in a human resources consultant, they fire everyone for you, and then you can start fresh because these are just resources. So reclaiming a language of compassion, care, understanding, and stewardship is really vital for our economy, which is really the economy of the whole biosphere, not just the human economy. And it's really important for our mental health, because I'd like to think of myself as a real human being rather than just someone with a big mouth for eating and a big bladder to hold it long enough and so forth. Just I'd like to be looked at as someone who's made in God's image. And maybe all of us would.
I feel like environmentalists are more on the higher level of thinking. Like the common people, like if you go to supermarket or someplace, even though you don't want to use plastic bag, but you have to buy those products which are already wrapped in plastic bags. And those things you're just vulnerable to see that happens. You want to see, how it's like a paper wrapping or something, but it's just not like that. If you want to buy something was more environmentalist, but that will be very expensive. Even the brand or the product, that will be expensive. So do you think there's a way to
there is. Wendell Berry has a beautiful essay called The Art of Consumer Resistance. And you might want to look up that article. What I have done already, as I've come into a store and you can't get anything, I'd go up to the store, I find the store manager and say, I can't buy anything here because the packaging is more expensive than the content, and the packaging presents a tremendous problem for me because my recycling bin is not big enough. What was interesting is I've seen some ads lately by one of the major soft drink companies saying, we have helped you develop recycling by putting our pop into cans because you can recycle these. And so how do we promote recycling? By more packaging. No, that's not what it's about. It means maybe we should be eating food from our garden, for example. And Let me tell you something that I did with my colleagues in India. There's a lot of nutritional blindness in India. And what my colleagues in South India discovered in Tamil Nadu was that nutritional blindness was due to a lack of vitamin A. And what we did through some ELCA grant, actually, we bought an awful lot of carrot seeds, and we put up eye clinics across the town of Trichinopoly, 1 million people, and we had students, college students, evaluate people's eyes to see whether they had nutritional blindness. If they had it seriously, they were referred to a doctor, but otherwise they were given a packet of carrot seeds. And they were given a few carrots as well, and they were told that if you would plant these seeds and grow carrots like these, that you would begin to increase your vitamin A, and you might be able to stem off the nutritional blindness. What we have in America is a blindness too, but it's not nutritional. It's advertisable or something like that. We're told that to be strong and healthy, we should eat more, I hardly dare say the word Fruit Loops, but I don't think there's anything wrong with Fruit Loops, provided it stays in its package. Because the package is really beautiful, the circles are really nice, and they look like little donuts, but they just shouldn't be eaten. The art of sales resistance, that was it. It's the art of sales resistance. That's what we have to do. And so if you feel like you need a snack, walk outside and see if there's something you can bite on. And if there isn't, plant it. Ruth and I have such a delightful time every morning. It's coming now as spring comes. We go out every morning and we harvest whatever we can add to our cereal bowl that morning. It's usually raspberries, but it may be other things. And resist sales, and that would be one piece of advice.
We should probably wrap up, but I do want to ask you one further question, Cal, you really touched on, but the subtitle of Earthwise is A Guide to Hopeful Creation Care. Sometimes you look at global warming and all those things and all the statistics, it's easy to just, it's too big, it's, feel hopeless. So what is your source of, or sources of hope, and why are you hopeful?
Well, I'm very hopeful because, first of all, our task is not to be successful, but to be faithful. So if everyone's faithful, we will be successful. And so my hope is that every one of us eventually will be faithful. Now that may be dodging the question in a way. But I think if we are faithful, no matter who we are, if we're a CEO of a major corporation or a parent or a grocery store person, a hardware store clerk, if we're faithful, we'll be thinking about all these different things and moving them in the direction of wholeness. So much, as you've said, in our society is geared to be thrown away. I know when we go sometimes to a toy store at Christmas time, you think of all these things that you'll buy and they'll be thrown away very, very quickly. And the packaging and everything else. We need more emphasis on contentment. One thing I did years ago is I had 3 hours extra in a Christian college library, and for some reason or other they had collected all these introductory economics texts. Most libraries don't collect those, but if you need books for your library, you can collect all of these, and they had 99 different economics texts, and I thought, what can I do with 3 hours, and I looked through the indexes of all those books for the word contentment, because I thought maybe that would be the height of economics, is to do things sufficiently well that you would be content. And so how many times did I find the word content? Not in any of the 99. If you look at the Bible, it's interesting, contentment figures pretty strongly. I think it's, is it 2 Timothy? You can look up contentment. And I think maybe that's what we have to be working on, is what does it mean to be content? It doesn't mean to be necessarily poor or famished or hungry, but be content. And so what we have to do, I think, is not only restore our language so that we are no longer consumers and taxpayers, but also restore our psyche, which restores it in a direction that says we don't have to have more and yet more, but we can move to the point of contentment. And when we are content, then we really find joy, happiness, and we also discover something about the real purpose of life. Thank you.
Thank you.